Okay, I think we're live, but for some reason my YouTube studio says this video is private. I hope that's not true. If the chat can let me know whether you can hear me, everything looks okay. Okay, good, good. I'm being lied to. Lied to as usual. Nice to see familiar faces, as always. Frank, Patricio, probably ruined your name there. Amp, of course. 5. Great, nice to see so many of you here. Yo, 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 yo. Zdarova, zdarova. Awesome, guys. Well, I think we can get started. There's some things to talk about. I don't want to overstate how much the market has moved, but there are some things to pay attention to. So, first things first, thank you to Bybit for sponsoring Technical Roundup. Their links are available in the description below. Be sure to check them out, show them some love, and support us by supporting them. Second of all, if you can go ahead before you forget and leave a like on this video, that'll help us a lot. Let's see if we can get over 100 in the first 30 minutes of the live stream. It's a fantastically achievable target. And thank you to those who are religious in their like button pressing. So with that said, let's get started. I think it makes sense to go through the big ones, especially the weekly time frame and the daily, to see what has changed since Monday's session. Certainly if you weren't there on Friday. We'll then look at some of the new stuff that I've added to our kind of technical roundup watch list here. A few of the altcoins look interesting. And then sort of towards the end, maybe the final quarter, using the charts as well, we can aggress? No, we're not going to aggress anything. We are going to address the title of whether, and I'm going to get butchered for this, I think it's DeFi, right? Decentralized finance. I think DeFi is much more intuitive, but DeFi is bullish, bearish, or neutral for Ethereum. And we're going to make a sort of technical and fundamental argument. And of course, I'd love to hear what you guys think as well. With that said, let's start with Bitcoin on the weekly time frame. And again, look, this was the weekly close. I'm not really sure how much I'm supposed to invent when it comes to this instrument and its weekly closes. Back in my day, weekly closes were important. Now a week. Well, nowadays, not much tends to happen. I think same as before. We know there's weekly resistance around 9,500, right? And weekly support around 9,600. This has been very much our weekly range. But most importantly, or perhaps what's made things most difficult, is price hasn't even been moving from weekly boundary to weekly boundary. Most of the price action has been really condensed pretty much in the middle of the weekly range. Okay, so not much going on in this time frame. We know the levels above and below market. Not going to spend too much time here. This nice juicy double top through 10.5, 10.7, as well as to the downside. We know we have this area, again, not drawn perfectly, of previous support and resistance. Okay, the kind of breakout level where you'd typically expect some sort of hook type of retest. Two really good areas to pay attention to, but even within the tight weekly range we're in now, the most recent weekly closes haven't been particularly helpful or compelling in that regard. So the wait continues. Daily time frame, I think this is one which was like kind of getting interesting, but all we've had, without exaggeration, is a move from level to level, right? None of the breakdowns or breakups, breakouts, of course, have had any significant follow through. That's kind of been the theme. You see, we traded to daily support, our 9.6 level, and then found resistance at resistance, which is our 9.2, 9.3 kind of confluence area. Okay, I got one chap when my Twitter DMs were open saying, oh, thank you for the live stream, you know, I longed the daily level and closed somewhere there, thanks so much. Now, it's great that, you know, if this helps you generate trade ideas, fantastic. That's not exactly what the channel is intended for. So if you're going to do that type of stuff and use the levels, whatever that means, you know, be responsible for your own risk as well as your winners. But in summary, in the technical summary, that is pretty much what we had. Daily support held, again, didn't spend much time there, and is now traded back to resistance. Really hasn't changed much. It retraced the leg down we had, and is essentially back where we started, right? Nothing terribly conclusive in that regard. As before, the more compelling downside trade idea for me would have to be a break of FTA, right? If 9.6 is a support holding this thing up, given we've got a lower low, and we're maybe arguably in a region for a lower high. Again, I'll talk about that in a sec. If you prefer your backside or confirmation or later entries, whatever technical term you want to use, this level really needs to break as support. Then look to sell rallies into it, and then look for 8.6. Okay, but while this level is holding, we're pretty much playing support resistance ping pong between an increasingly narrowing range of 9,000 and like 9,300. There's really not much more to it. Now, in terms of, is this a bearish retest, right? We had the breakdown, we hit support, we bounced. Is it a bearish retest? I think I'm not compelled either way. I think it needs to, I'd need to see more price action. And the reason I'm cautious is you see price just pretty much stuck to this level very firmly. And in the past, we had a failed breakout above it and then went back to sideways, having achieved nothing. And for all I know, this could be the failed breakout below it before moving sideways ad infinitum once again. Okay, so just like this wasn't a valid kind of breakout and retest, perhaps this isn't a valid breakdown and retest, certainly with support holding for now. So no real strong technical views. As always, if that changes, there are loads of ways in which I can inform you. The newsletter comes out every Tuesday. Go subscribe to that, link in the description. It's free forever. Telegram, Twitter, etc. But really, for now, I don't want to read too much into this. Okay, that's kind of where we are with Bitcoin, and even on a kind of intraday basis, pretty much reflects the high time frame view. Unsurprisingly, not spending much time at these levels at all. Hits support, goes to resistance, and is now kind of, we're floating in the middle, right? So yeah, that's Bitcoin. Forgive all the excitement on that front. Let's take a look at ETH. It looks structurally a bit cleaner, but I think the conclusions we come to are going to be very similar. Weekly time frame, look, I'm not even going to spend too much time here. I think it's arguable that you could draw this out as our kind of interim or shorter term weekly range. We've got resistance pretty much at this close and support at the resistance at the highest close and support at the lowest close, and all we've had was a kiss of resistance and price closing, you know, back within the range. Again, we're not having any breakouts, we're not having any shifts in market structure, big levels being broken or even tested, still moving within the same parameters. The daily time frame is slightly more interesting, but at the same time slightly less clear as well. Why? Well, we had this really nice level form at 240. Let me actually get rid of the levels that we have here. Okay, so you remember we talked about a short-term range, which we essentially eyeballed, but it was really easy to build off of the levels as well. We've got resistance around the 250 mark, highest close. You've got support around the 230 mark, lowest close. And then we had interim or intermediate support based off this lowest close here, right? We could also use it to include these wicks. Doesn't really matter too much. Let's just draw this level for now. Okay. What happened? Well, as we discussed, you pretty much had the break of support and price moving in one candle to the range low. And now the question is this kind of a valid, is where price is right now, is this a valid bearish retest of the same level? And my conclusion is I'm not terribly sure, okay? The reason for that is, well, there are two. One is if you draw this area using the wicks, right, the specific lows pre-breakdown, even if we just use the last layer pre-break, you can see that the daily close suggests that that level has been reclaimed. Okay, the second argument, if we use our old level from this highest close, it leads us to a similar conclusion, that price closed above resistance during yesterday's price action. Okay, the counter argument, I mean, even if we bring on these levels on an intraday time frame, and the area becomes extra clear, right, where you've got old lows, etc., then you have the consolidation pre-breakdown, and we could literally box off this whole thing here, or even just use the candle closes, like the lowest close and the highest close as our kind of range. Again, I wouldn't blame you if you were to interpret this as a bullish kind of break and retest. At the same time, if you said this is the deviation portion at the level and we're now finding resistance at the level again, I wouldn't blame you either. Fantastic summary. All it means is it's not terribly clear to me who's in control around the 240 handle. I think just way too many variables for me in terms of how to draw the levels. What are we using as our anchors? You know, okay, well, this is valid supply, if you want to call it that. So it's bearish, but then we're above support, so it's bullish. Look, when I get this type of stuff where I can make good arguments either way, I'd prefer to sit out until something really clear happens. Now, for me, that would mean pretty much a breakout around the 240 handle, right? So something like this would be preferred, where price came into this level, we're kind of chopping around it, we can delineate the first high made, and then if we break market structure at that point, make a higher high, right, this type of thing, this price action is very likely at that point to quote-unquote confirm, if you're a fan of that, as a deviation, and then we can make an argument towards a retest of the range high. But as you can see, it's a bit of a messy area right now. And it's sort of what we talked about either on Friday or in one of the videos, I don't remember. If price essentially makes its way back to where it was trading, you know, so much trading done here, and the equivalent on Bitcoin, so much trading done around 9.2, 9.3. If price goes back to these levels and it's not clear, then I'm just going to assume it's chop continuation, right? So sorry not to have a clearer or particularly decisive view here. If that changes or if price develops in a way that's super clear to me, of course, I'll let you know. But for now, both with Bitcoin and ETH, all we've had is a short term or just a bounce off of support. For Bitcoin, it was the 9K level. For ETH, it was the 230 level. And we're pretty much back where we started. I don't think there's enough evidence, certainly not ahead of today's daily close, to make any further inferences with regard to, oh, bearish retest or bearish retest failed, reclaim, blah, blah, blah. I just don't see clear cases for either of that. Okay? And if that changes, I'll let you know. ETH BTC is slightly better. Okay? On the weekly time frame, and this time in the newsletter, but we also covered it on Friday, I'm pretty sure, we wrote about a non-trivial break in market structure using this high, okay, and the fact that we made a higher high just on the closing basis, right? High, higher high, or just that resistance was broken, right? This is obviously a pretty big swing level, and it kind of mitigated or nullified the pattern of lower highs and higher lows now that we've got a higher high, right? So we're kind of looking for the weekly close around this area to see what would happen. And as you can see, that was slightly more positive, given we had a retest and then a close above the level of market structure. So that's quite positive. And you can see that on the daily time frame as well. It actually aligned pretty nicely. This is the same level that I just drew in light shot. And the daily price action lined quite nicely. You get a break above the level, short-term price action below it. This is the kind of failed breakdown, deviation, whatever you want to call it. You could even just say it's a retest on the shorter term or on a lower time frame of these prior highs here. But more importantly, we then got back above the level, and that's where price is right now. So ETH BTC still looks decent. Certainly on the weekly time frame, I'm not yet seeing a case for weakness. The only caveat, again, with ETH BTC is that not only is it a kind of technical pair, if you will, but also the fact that if Bitcoin downside volatility picks up, there's a good chance that the technicals just go out the shitter with ETH BTC, so it's worth being cautious. But given the nature of what we do, we can't obviously plan for every single scenario a million times in advance. So for now, given the available evidence, which is a phrase I like to use, I'm not bearish ETH BTC, it looks quite good, certainly coming off of the weekly close. Okay, so that's been one of the more straightforward developments. Meanwhile, all ETH and Bitcoin, the dollar pairs, have done is essentially float back to their pre-breakdown levels, right? So that's kind of the summary version of my initially long-ish rant. Price broke down, floated back to pre-breakdown levels, but I'm not yet convinced that it's a bearish retest that's forming. It could just be a return to the chop zone. Does that make sense? Like, not everything is a bearish retest necessarily. Sometimes price just travels away from a level that it likes and then gets back to it, and it doesn't mean you sell the fuck out of it, right? That can change, but just for now, that's my view. A couple of other interesting ones on the weekly time frame. EOS isn't one of them, unfortunately. Litecoin, again, you can see the majors are really struggling here. Well, I say struggling in relative terms. They haven't made lower lows, right? But within their short-term ranges, highest close resistance, lowest close support, still looking very much constricted within those. Okay, again, I think even with the majors, if the technicals pick up, there is always room for a bit of a short-term pop, right? Even if we eyeball, no, Rick, you haven't missed the ETH bit yet. Even if you eyeball this kind of consolidation, right? I hate when Lightshot does it. It just makes my, hold on, go away, and then we're gonna try again. Great. Even if you eyeball the range just using, in a very zoomed out way, highest close, lowest close, if we get a short-term pop, you can see that the first trouble area is maybe kind of this level here, right? So there is some space for day trade or shorter term longs should this thing show any sign of bullishness, just a crumb of a higher high or some sort of breakout. But really the majors haven't been keen on any such behavioral patterns whatsoever. XRP in a very similar vein. We've got our level from the cluster top, pretty much. Where does that come from? I think it's from the daily. Anyway, this level comes from somewhere. I'm going to assume it's important. Here we've even got the next level of resistance above it, right? At 23s with resistance at 22s. And we could even just superimpose, which is a nice little verb, resistance here. Even with this, where you kind of formed a range at resistance, any sort of quick break, there is space, right? There's always space for a quick and dirty kind of level-to-level trade, but it's just not been lining up, okay? It's crazy to see in a time where the smaller caps are just absolutely melting old levels that we can't get a short-term shift in market structure in the majors. They're literally getting stuck at the first levels of resistance, and that's been the case for like a week now, okay? Which is not frustrating, but just disappointing, for lack of a better term, right? And I don't see the argument. I mean, if you have any evidence to the contrary, I'd be very keen to see it. I don't hold particularly strong views, but I don't see strong evidence that this is new money, which is just avoiding the large caps and it's all being pumped into lower caps, decentralized finance stuff. I think it's the same old capital, just being washed around places where, those lower caps and those new narratives and sexier coins than the majors, right? Now, whether that's bullish, bearish, etc., I don't hold, again, no strong views there, but I'm personally not convinced that, okay, the majors are dead and all this new money is flowing into decentralized finance products. I just haven't seen any good evidence to indicate that that's the case. I think it's the same old money, just with different allocations, okay? Stark says, are you bearish on XRP? Sort of. I mean, it's at resistance, but isn't breaking down yet. I don't really trade XRP BTC all too often. I was asked in the last stream whether this is consolidation at resistance. My technical argument would have to be no. Oh, sorry, my mic was muted. My technical argument would have to be no. Because when you get consolidation at resistance, what price will typically do is hit the level, make a low, hit the level, make a higher low, hit the level, kind of just give you less violent reactions every time, and then eventually break. And you'll see it keeps making usually higher lows as it comes into the level. It's arguably done that here up to a point, but this break in market structure isn't typically what you see when you get bullish consolidation at resistance. Even if it does get reclaimed eventually, that for me means it's not consolidation at resistance, okay? And as I said, the level's behaving really well, so just something like this would be a lot better than buying resistance and hoping it breaks, right? It's just out of good trading practice. And we're actually going to talk about the S&P as well. And of course, thank you for over 100 likes on this video already. I love you guys. You're much better than when you watch Donald, who just forgets to ask for everything and anything. Ask and you shall receive. So that's XRP. That's my answer there. Very clear levels, but I mean, just stuck at resistance for now. Matic, I think it's Matic, right? I have this beautiful trend line on Matic, actually. But nothing crazy here. In a similar kind of way, it's just been trapped in the range that we've had for a while. You've got resistance at 250, support at 228, and trendline support falls around the 230 handle. And this certainly hasn't been one of the runners compared to some of the smaller caps. ADA is good. I actually really kind of spent some time with this chart and thought that it'd be useful to at least have some levels, right? And not just say, oh, well, this went up a lot, so that's it, it's over. For me, whenever price is, not necessarily in price discovery, but certainly like far away from recent levels of price action, I just like to ground myself with recency. So in this case, where is support? Support is the lowest close for me at 1275. Right, so the only way I could get long ADA, which seems to be the only questions we were getting recently, how do I get long these, which isn't unreasonable, like it's gone up a lot, fine, I appreciate you for following trend. I wouldn't buy this level blindly. I'd want to see some sort of failed breakdown to define my risk, get bought back up into something like this, right? I'd love something like this, get involved, and then punt it to the range high, but then some way higher as well. But this element for me is important. I want to see support tested, a failed breakdown, which then gives me this reclaim of the pre-breakdown level. Okay, long story short, support at 1275, failed breakdown through there that gets bought up. I need something to define my risk when I trade altcoins, so that would do it. And then that would be good enough for me. Alternatively, obviously the logical corollary of that, and as Hector is insinuating, if this level fails and doesn't get reclaimed, I think there's a very quick drop to, well, pretty much through most of this price action here, back to 1,100, if not significantly lower into 877. But again, it really depends what altcoins look like at that stage. Bagsy says, do you have any intention on shorting any of the altcoins / the most extended ones? Dude, like, if I'm going to short altcoins, I want to short the weak ones, right? A lot of the time I disagree with this as overextended. It just means it was strong and it went up a lot. That doesn't necessarily mean it has, like, more potential to go down, if that makes sense, right? What if that one instrument has more dip buyers than the others, which barely moved, but are going to get sold just as hard as the others should the market correct? You kind of see what I'm saying? So if I'm going to get bearish and short altcoins, I assume you mean on linear futures, like short the USD pairs, then I'd actually be looking for the shit ones and the weak ones to sell. So I'd expect them to get slaughtered, as opposed to try to get ahead of the strong ones that I think have kind of a lot more space to go down. I hope that answer makes sense. It's very intuitive to think, oh, well, this has gone up a lot, so if I short it, it's got like, it could go down a lot. Like, I understand that reasoning. But purely from selecting instruments for that purpose, I'd much rather choose the ones that were weak to start with, the ones that were never strong, and I know because of the correlation, they're gonna shit just as hard, if not harder, so why make my job more difficult? I'd rather just short something which has got no support anyway. Does that make sense? I hope it does. It does in my head. What else? BNB is one of the interesting ones, actually. So we talked about this on Friday, and my view was... And this comes from these levels are monthly levels for the most part. Certainly the reclaim this and the resistance range high ones are from the monthly. And we were at this point here, I think, during the live stream. And I said, well, look, this looked pretty good, but now it looks kind of rough because we have this breakout above the monthly level and then we're back below it, blah, blah, blah. Price pretty much came back to retest the range high. and now engulfed it once again, and it's currently being retested as support. I think I'm honestly going to have to wait pretty much until the monthly close for BNB. This might just be chop. I might just be, you know, rushing to conclusions, whether this is a bearish retest, reclaim, blah, blah, blah. Don't think it matters too much, but I have no problems waiting pretty much a week, or maybe until the next, until the next weekly close, whatever it may be, to get a clearer view. The weekly certainly lined up slightly nicer than it was in the live stream, because that daily buyback was impressive. Even if we do the kind of eye test, where we have like an area of support here, the range low, and then like whatever, an area of resistance here as the range high, you can kind of see a big old engulfy boy candle. Kind of looks like ETH BTC in that regard, right? Big, strong impulse on the buyer's side, a thinnish retest candle, and now we're back at support. Okay, so on the weekly time frame, I wouldn't want price going back below 19k, or this area here, however you want to define it. And I think the next objective is pretty reasonable, the range high, or if you're conservative, the lower high level at this swing point. Okay, so that's BNB. Still looks decent, right? Still looks decent. I'm personally going to give it a bit of time, given how, this kind of engulfy, choppy, whatever type of structure. God knows how this will end up, but it looks decent for now. Though I'd honestly just wait for the high time frame closes there. KMD was interesting. This is one of the ones is Ada New King. Someone... Oh dear. Well, we'll see what happens, right? Yeah, well, we can revisit this towards the end of the stream. Interesting one. KMD broke a decent level. This isn't the one we had. This isn't one of the ones we had on levels for in the last live stream, but pretty kind of simple TA. This was support, was resistance, and is, yeah, now that I look at it, it's kind of a shitty close. Is that a support resistance flip? Who knows? I think if pullbacks get bought at 738, you've got a good chance that this stabs towards the range high. This daily close is kind of worrying in hindsight, but kind of short-term technicals, 738 bid to 877 wouldn't be the wildest idea in the world. If it starts floating back, then whatever. The idea is wrong / bad. XLM, yeah. So this doesn't look terrible yet. I think alts are just kind of pulling back generally right now, right? Is it because Bitcoin's nuking? What's going on here? ETH, yeah, nothing too crazy, right? Anyway, XLM, right? Where we discussed, how would you get on board XLM, blah, 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 and we came to the conclusion that Strat was a better play than XLM, because it pretty much looked the same technically, except it hadn't moved yet, whereas XLM already had. As discussed, the trouble areas for XLM, the first kind of real levels of resistance, given this high time frame breakout, would be this consolidation here. Specifically, being conservative, we've got the last layer pre-break at 1374, and then this level of support here in a similar way, the last layer pre-break at 2072. Not really much has changed since that point. The daily time frame, yeah, sure, this looks scary in the short term, but as long as the range that it's coming from holds, then it shouldn't be too scary, right? If we've got kind of resistance, support, right? As long as this kind of resolves positively one way or another, it's not the end of the world. I think anything below 960, and if we start in revisiting 882s, I don't think that's really a reload type of trade. At that point, I think, I certainly wouldn't want a correction like that to reload. From the high, that would itself already be a kind of 25% correction, and then you also will have lost support in the pre-breakdown range. So with XLM, the high time frames are still fine. Low time frame correcting into support, which is the pre-breakdown range, right? Those of you who've watched the live streams back in the day will be familiar with that type of technical structure, right? Where you've got impulse, consolidation, impulse, and the consolidation or the range you typically expect to act as a support resistance type of pivot. This isn't too different. It looks slightly messier, but if you just go up a time frame or whatever, it kind of cleans itself out, where you've got the impulse move, the flagging portion or the consolidation, whatever, and then the next impulse move, So directional bias wise, you'd expect support in this area. Again, it's not the whole box, ideally the upper and or the lower boundary or something like this, blah, blah, blah. Doesn't really matter too much. But anything below the lower boundary, yes, technically 882 is like a rounded retest of support, but it's not the type that I like to get involved in with altcoins. Okay, XRP USD, I don't know why this is here. I didn't put it there, Governor, promise. Yeah, I don't have any strong views here. We can start paying more attention towards USD pairs on a lot of these altcoins, but a lot of the time they kind of just mirror, a lot of the time, not always, but often they will mirror ETH USD. I think generally, I mean, I've got a few here. If they look outstanding or memorable in some way, we can talk about them, but in this instance, I don't think that's applicable, which is cool. EOS, very much the same. Now, Tezos is a very interesting one, and this just hit support, which it didn't do before the live stream. Actually just hit this level. Now, this is a good one, right? And the reason I say it's a good one is because it's one that a lot of people were tracking for kind of Link 2.0, that they were moving in, you know, in tandem with one another, and Link completely moved. Therefore, you know, Tezos is going to moon as well, but later. And we talked in the Friday session how this essentially just hit resistance, right? On the weekly time frame, the highest close, you know this pattern, you've seen it a million times. Resistance, oops, broken, comes back and fails, right? And then finds resistance, kind of at resistance again, right? Resistance, breakout, resistance at the level again. Kind of what we have here. You've got the close above, close below. No retest really, certainly not on a high time frame on the breakdown. And that's kind of what happened here. Now the larger range is still fine, and there's also some trend line funkery going on there as well. But you can see where we've pulled back to now is actually an area of weekly support. It was weekly resistance. You can see we labeled that when we were elsewhere. But this is back at support now, which isn't too terrible. What would I like to see here? Look, I think if you're more of a momentum continuation guy, price doesn't very often fake out twice, right? So you got to fake out the trend line once. You kind of closed above, closed below, bearish retest, went down, right? It's not very often, unless you're trading ETH BTC, apparently, the price is going to give you a double fake out. So I think any run back at the trend line that closes whatever through this high, or just basically closes through it, there's a good chance you get acceleration from that move. That's one reasonable way. The other is kind of like ADA or Cardano, especially given a lot of these altcoins are selling off. In a similar type of vein, I'd love to see a failed attempt at the lows or at support that defines my risk for me, then reclaims the level in some form. I can define my risk and then essentially get on board into the trend line and beyond type of thing. Of course, the alternative to both of those, if we're using kind of basic TA type of stuff, is, well, okay, resistance held. We're going to go towards the bottom of the range, and then we can kind of see what happens there. But in terms of ideas closer to market, I think another stab at the trend line for a continuation entry would be pretty reasonable, simply because I don't think it'll fake out twice. Or alternatively, some sort of overextension through the 3K level. You all know what that means by now. This type of stuff, or close below, close above. We can do a whole video on that if you want. Maybe if we get to 200 likes, wink wink, I'll do a video on what does bullish / bearish price action actually mean. No promises, but that would be a pretty good incentive. Anyway, yeah. From resistance, we're back within this old range that we have from the weekly time frame. And I want to see a bit more from this if I'm going to buy the retest, which I don't typically do on these altcoins, to be honest. But technicals are technicals. We can actually see where those weekly levels come from. It's literally the most brain dead levels ever. Highest close, lowest close, right? That's it. Pretty straightforward. This is where the support comes from. This is where resistance comes from. And I'd like to pay a bit more attention to these. I'm not one to blindly enter at altcoin levels for the most part. I've been, had my ass handed to me enough times, so I usually wait for something much clearer, but really something risk defined where I know I can put a stop and not feel like a mug about it, even though these tend to be a bit more wiki or illiquidy, whatever you want to use. Okay, long story short, rejected at resistance. We're back at support now. and I want to see a concentrated effort to get below 3k that fails to then convince me of another bullish attempt. Obviously, the logical corollary of that is if it fails at 3k, at that point we're back within the range, and good chance we go to the range low and maybe overshoot the underside as well. Okay, so a few of these altcoins really are in places where they should bounce if the market's going to put in another leg. Cardano's at such a point. Well, there we go. Right. Some reaction to support. Similar fashion in not XLM. Tezos. So yeah, this is a developing situation, as the BBC likes to say. Link. Oh, did I really miss that? Okay. So I actually added some levels to Link. So yeah, also really dipping a bit, right? So with Link, again, normally when price is in price discovery, as technical guys, certainly if you're high time frame skewed, and the lights in my room just went off, I'm about to fucking scream. Normally when price is in price discovery, if you're more high time frame oriented, you kind of have to sit out unless you've got some fantastic trend following, momentum, type of trailing stop, ATR, volatility, ADX, trading view front page system. And you just think, well, okay, I'm going to wait for a range to develop or a shift in market structure on the high time frame or something. Otherwise, I'll just presume the trend is intact until it isn't, right? So in this instance, I kind of added some short-term levels, the range high or the highest close as one structure, and the range low and the lowest close as another. And that's pretty much what's in play right now. So in order to get bullish Link, if I think Link's going to have continuation, just like Tezos, I want to see an attempt to break the 77 handle, okay? I want it to fail in one form or another spectacularly, and then the consolidation that led to the break, I'd look for something like that. This would be the entry type of area, and that would define my risk. Does that make sense for Link? Do you see what I mean generally by price making an attempt at the level, failing, defining my risk for me, and then I get involved on any type of pullback? Does that type of price structure that I've drawn make sense? So support, whatever, bounce, whatever, does whatever, blah, 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 comes back into the level. This is the kind of consolidation or the, you know, some sort of candle structure formed at the level. It then breaks, as in the level then breaks, okay? Fails, right? Fails to break down below the low, gets bought back up, and the level where I want to do business is the consolidation or the price structure that led to the lower low, right? I hope that makes sense. Again, I can do a bit more on that later. But yeah, this is that's kind of same rules apply for Link. Strat, we talked about this in Friday's session, how it looked a lot like XLM. It moved a little bit, but you can see it's just getting stuck at the weekly swing high and selling off as the rest of the market is. I'm not going to have any really strong views here. I think the only rule that applies in a very similar vein, if it pulls back to the kind of range high retest type of territory around 57.80, we just go full Donald and say retest not allowed, and we're bearish at support. Obviously exaggerating to some extent, but I generally agree that momentum is a much greater ally than pullbacks and kind of high time frame retests when you're trading altcoins. I'm gonna butcher your name. Are you Churche? How do you even pronounce that shit? Is that a Turkish O? Is that an sound? Anyway, I'm just guessing it's Churche or something. If ETH closes around here, would you lean towards that it was a bearish retest? Probably. Yeah, if we get this type of, not engulfing candle, but if I see strength through these lows, specifically a close back through the last low pre-break, that would give me more confidence that this was a bearish retest of supply, quote unquote, rather than some sort of SR reclaimy type of bollocks. We'll also see how it, yeah, and you can see again, if we just use our high time frame levels, then you kind of get your, one of the scenarios we talked about. Is this the deviation and this is the bearish retest, or was this blah, 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 whatever. The answer to your question is yes, if ETH closes around here, I would lean towards a bearish retest of the 240 area generally, right? Like that. With this being the overthrow portion. Yes, but we'll see. We'll see. What else is interesting? TRX, not much. Now, S&P is a really interesting one. Okay, what I really don't like is how, and I talked about this on Friday, we've been tracking the S&P to the downside very effectively. So when this shit sells off, Bitcoin tends to sell off as well, but we haven't been tracking its upside effectively at all, right? Which sucks, because some of these moves, if they were correlated kind of both ways, we would have reached, I don't know, whatever, 10k or some more interesting levels, etc., etc. But we seem to get the worst of both worlds, or certainly the worst of the bad world and none of the good world. I'm really butchering the idioms at that point. But what's effectively happening is, whereas before we would track both the downside and the upside gains, we're now tracking the downside effectively, if that. I haven't even noticed much of that, given, I mean, this really hasn't gone down a lot. But the upside or the breakouts in the S&P, we're not getting the same follow through on Bitcoin, which sucks, right? So you take all the worst things and you get none of the positives, like some sort of toxic relationship. Game says, which is a bullish signal. I don't agree. At least I don't think so. Because it means we're correlated to the downside, and the market sells off when the S&P sells off, but we get none of our none of the benefits of it rallying. And perhaps from a high time frame or macro point of view, if we end up getting some sort of risk off into the US election, right, and the S&P, instead of the V-shaped recovery, we kind of just get a slowdown into November, that wouldn't be great for Bitcoin, I don't think. Okay. Now, two levels that I think, this actually looks pretty good. Two levels that I think are important on the S&P high time frame is essentially this range that occurred before the all-time high, right? And again, you'll see that throughout all my charts, I try to use a replicable logic. We've got the highest close for resistance and the lowest close for support. Market broke above it for a short period of time, obviously failed, etc., etc. Came back to retest the underside once, and now we seem to be breaking above the area once again. Now, one point I want to make that's a slightly tangential, but bear with me, is that a lot of the time when you see people drawing like either order blocks or pivots or demand/supply zones, all they're really doing when boxing out these types of structures, for the most part, is all it's showing is a range condensed or shown on a different time frame, right? So let's look at this. So typically, it wouldn't surprise me if you had someone say, right, this is like a whatever bullish block, or this is a demand zone because it led to a move up, etc. And you can find millions of these examples, and we will do. So that's on the weekly time frame, right? That this is like a block, a demand zone, etc., etc. But when you look at it on the intraday time frame, right? Let me just get rid of these low time frame levels real quick. And using that same kind of rectangular structure, what you can see with the magic demand zone rectangle order block thing is all that it's showing is a previous area of resistance and a previous area of support. And trust me, I've been down the price action rabbit hole, etc., etc. It really does end up being different names for the same thing. It ultimately does come around full circle to support, resistance, range high, range low. It's all kind of the same stuff, right? So if you're just starting out and you're dealing with all sorts of different terminology, and you think like, okay, well, I have to learn support, resistance, I have to learn ranges, I have to learn supply, demand, I have to learn pivots, I have to learn order blocks, I have to learn, when you split these up in your mind all in different categories, a basic analysis of what these things look like under a microscope to some extent should show you that these concepts aren't really different at all, right? So most of the rectangles that you see... Oh, what are you doing here? Most of the rectangles that you see drawn, or the different names for all of them, just end up turning into larger time frame support resistance levels, right? I mean, ETH BTC, there's a kind of famous one on that, right? So if you draw, for example, this cluster, and clusters are the same, right? So let's say you drew this structure here, with consolidation before a move down, like you'd say this is a supply zone, or it's like a bearish block, or it's a whatever. And then we simply view it on a lower time frame, right? All you can basically see that all this magic rectangle is, which seems to have these insane properties, is just a range, right? It's just like a support resistance level. It's just showing the same price data on a different time frame. It's condensing the low time frame range into a candle. So there's nothing special about the candle itself. Like, oh, this is an up candle before this, or a down candle before this, etc. There's nothing special about the candle structure. It's more the time period and the range that's being condensed within the candle that's important, as opposed to just the candlestick. Do you see what I'm saying? Does that make sense to anyone? How this is just the same shit. Every candle is a range, as Intromoto says. And that means all these price action techniques are essentially showing you the same information and just delineating it in the same but slightly different ways. I hope that makes sense to somebody. God, if it doesn't, then I've just wasted whatever 5-10 minutes of your time. That's just something to bear in mind, right? And that's why I don't put too much weight into terminology. I'll say support, resistance, range high, range low, cluster, X, Y, Z, A, B, C, because it's all really the same thing. Okay. So yeah, with the S&P, given we've re-entered this pre-all-time high range, I think a similar argument can be made. Again, the weekly time frame may be a bit slow. You could look at the daily or the weekly if you're not trading this and you just want the high time frame information. A close above 3220s, there's a good chance we reach for at least through 3300. And at that point, you get very close to all-time highs. Okay, so pretty much this is resistance. This is the next level of resistance. Market came into it, pulled back, and it looks like we're making another attempt now. Monitor the weekly and daily timeframes for signs of rejection, but for now, it's certainly looking decent. Okay, comp. Gosh, this is one of the DeFi, decentralized finance, whatever type of linear. I believe this is a linear. Yeah, of course, linear futures pairs on FTX that people were asking about. I think in a very similar vein, we have a nice little range to deal with here before this thing sold off. So if I wanted to long, you can see where resistance is, right? Old support. Oops, forgive me. Support, support, breakdown, resistance, resistance. Straight sell-off, no structure formed. Resistance at the range high that comes from this prior level of support. Accordingly, give me something like that that takes out to the pre-breakdown structure. This should be familiar from about 10 minutes ago. I'll get involved in a pullback and then look for A to B. Does that make sense? That was a bit quick, but it should make sense with regard to comp. A few people were asking on Friday. Yeah. Ouch. Certainly momentum has picked up. 15-second comp analysis, yeah. Yeah. The good thing is, we publish Technical Roundup every Tuesday at 8 p.m. UTC. Used to be paid, now it's totally free. Literally open the link, open up the description, or just type in technicalroundup.com. It's free to sign up. There are no hoops, no captures, nothing, just your email. Well, there might be a capture actually, but just go sign up and we will have a very thorough, I'm sure, for a change, analysis of all this kind of stuff if the market really does something in tomorrow's issue. Now the question is, DeFi surge bullish for Ethereum. I'm no expert on this, right? And that's it, the show's over. I have no clue. No, of course. No, look, my personal view is that it made a lot of sense for the ICO hype to that kind of ICO narrative to drag Ethereum higher, because it was literally the tool through which access to that whole market was facilitated, right? You had these gas wars and it deposited ETH and got all these ERC20s, all of this type of shit. ETH was the tool to promulgate. Is that a real word? Yes, it is a real word. ETH was the tool to kind of promulgate this narrative, right? Now, in this case, with the DeFi thing, it's not reliant on ETH to do whatever the hell it's doing, right? In all its different forms, yield farming, all of that crap. If anything, we've seen a resurgence or further interest in stablecoins since DeFi became a thing rather than Ethereum. So is DeFi surge bullish for Ethereum? I think it doesn't have to be. Maybe by relation, it'll renew interest in ETH and you'll get your old kind of crypto kitties, whatever similar type of resurgence crap. But I think what really I think those making analogies between DeFi and kind of the ICO bubble, while the technicals or while things may align from a narrative point of view, I think instrumentally DeFi is nowhere near as bullish for Ethereum as the ICO narrative was, simply because you couldn't have the ICO narrative without ETH. But as everything is pointing towards, you can have the DeFi push without the same overt reliance on Ethereum. If you agree, if you disagree, if you think I'm an idiot, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. But that really seems to be my understanding. And if you want, we can actually get some sort of DeFi fucking Ethereum CryptoKitties expert for one of the shows, maybe as a Friday guest at some point, and ask him all the questions in the world. I think the one thing that's not going to change is absurd valuations and hype cycles in crypto. I don't think that's going anywhere. And I don't think DeFi is in any way different from, the previous narratives and the previous cycles we've had. So if there's something you don't understand and everyone is talking about it as being the next huge thing, etc., etc., I'm not saying that means, oh, that's it, it's the top, there's no money to be made. Not at all. There's certainly a lot of room for inflated valuations, but I tend to stay away from that type of stuff if I don't understand it particularly well myself. Unless, of course, I'm just trading it technically, right? So, yes, I think it's valid to say there's some bear market PTSD, whatever, alts haven't gone up in 2 years, etc., etc., therefore you should hate everything. I totally understand that sentiment. But there is weight and validity to the fact that there will always be narratives to buy shitcoins, just by virtue of how they work and bloody order book depth and liquidity and the lower market cap nature of these beasts means that there will be crazy pumps. But I think none of that changes the ironclad notion, I think, at this point, that you don't marry these bags, you don't turn into some guru or mystical figure who thinks that this is the next big thing. Certainly as a trader, just like before, if there's a narrative, great, that means there's probably more liquidity and more for me to trade. I'll get in, I'll get out, and let the investors and the tech futurists figure out the rest. I don't think that is a particularly malleable principle. It's generally served people well. Not marrying your bags over the last, pretty much throughout market cycles generally. So I was talking to Donald about this yesterday, and I'm like, what do you think about this whole DeFi, whatever type of stuff? He didn't have any strong views, and it kind of led me to the conclusion that you don't have to care, right? I think there's a there's a tendency in crypto to really chase these narratives. It's like, okay, well, you know, DeFi is this huge thing. I need to get on top of it and understand, otherwise I won't make money, etc. You don't need to be on board or have a full understanding of whatever the prevailing narrative in that moment is. I think if you know where you have an edge, and in times where you don't, or in other market conditions, you just preserve your capital, there's nothing wrong with that either. Or you just steal Loomdart's calls. That's great as well. I think he's still active in Telegram. But yeah, guys, honestly, if you want like a guest for Friday who can maybe open our eyes towards why this time it's different, and there's going to be a whole lot of the world is changing, decentralized finance, long everything, let us know in the comments below, and we could, I'm sure, bring someone on. Okay? For now, yeah, nothing. Again, we're seeing some sell-offs certainly in these pairs. Bitcoin down a bit, but again, really, how much has this candle changed from what we've talked about in the beginning of the stream? Really not much. Ether's looking a bit worse for wear. Low time frame looks rough, this big scary candle, but again, we're dealing with weekly market structure, and once again, it's pretty much pulled back to that exact same level there. You can see that with this pre-breakout high, so nothing too unreasonable. Break in market structure in EOS, not terribly surprising. Matic back to the trend line. Yeah. Cardano back at support. BNB back again at the chop level again. KMD looks shit for now. Yeah, at support. I don't want to read into this too much, but you guys should know what I'm looking for. The clearest ones for me again would be Link, because if I'm going to be long, I want to be long the strong ones. I want to stab through 7740s, give me some sort of clear rejection from the lows, and I'll get long a pullback back into the range high and then into the local high. I think that would be good. I think Tezos can follow a similar logic at 3K. This type of wick price action typically isn't enough for me to long these alts unless it's some crazy scam wick or into some sort of absurd level where I managed to have stink bids. Don't remember the last time that happened. But again, similar type of thing. Give me the break of the level or some sort of attempt below it. Really impulsive rejection. And then the consolidation that led to the move down, I'll look to long that with the low defining my risk. And at that point, my first trouble area would be the trend line, and then maybe much higher. Okay, just to be clear what this type of price pattern is, it's got a million different names. I'm sure you've all seen, like, oh, engulfed demand zone or breaker or range, whatever the fuck. It's all really the same thing. Let's say you've got a level of market structure, right? Like a swing low. Let me make this slightly bigger. You've got a level of market structure, which is a swing low, right? Here. Price comes down below it, forms some sort of price pattern. It could be a candle, right? This is where the whole candle discussion comes in, like a daily candlestick, for example. But really, what price structure within here is some sort of range or consolidation. Whether that's one candle, two candles, whatever, right? You should know by now that it's all the same stuff. If not, just play back the stream a little bit. Some sort of range here. And then that range leads to a break in market structure, right? Price makes a lower low. And what preceded that lower low was this range here. So when the market starts to rally in this area, this is presumed to be resistance. Why? Because it was the origin or I don't want to say the cause, because now we start getting into market microstructure and don't want to start making those claims. But certainly from a technical trading point of view, this is the range or the candle or the structure that preceded a lower low, right? And if something preceded or formed before, or if you really want to push it, caused a lower low, it should be bearish, right? Price should find resistance in that area. So instead, if you get something like this, at that point, obviously the support, resistance, retest, whatever sellers have been smoked, and you have a trap or rejection below the last swing low. So this price structure, or the pre-breakdown range that should have been resistance, you now expect to be support. So any pullbacks back into that level are typically for buying. Your risk is defined by the lower low made, and then you target usually either the lower high level or, again, really depends where FTA is. There's a whole video on that. But does this make sense? This whole diagram, you've got a swing low, a range forms, or some sort of price structure, consolidation, rectangle, for lack of a better term. The rectangle precedes a lower low, which is typically bearish break in market structure, blah, blah, blah. Because this rectangular thing preceded a downside move, you expect it to act as resistance. So therefore, when it fails to do its job and it gets engulfed, you know that these guys are trapped, right? The sellers below the low are screwed. This is likely, the rectangle itself is likely turned to support, but most importantly, the low defines your risk, and you basically squeeze the sellers below the low as the market pushes away from them. Okay, and it's a very similar type of logic to the upside as well. And again, engulfed demand zone, breaker, range, deviation thing, doesn't really matter. It's all the same thing. We've got a swing high, right? The market comes into the level and you get some sort of rectangle. Now, whether that's a range, a supply, demand zone, blah, 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 doesn't really matter. It's all the same thing. And then you get a move which results in a higher high, right? Break in market structure. Boom. High, higher high. Now that's typically bullish, and you're expecting the rectangle to act as support given it preceded a bullish move or a break in market structure. Okay, so in a similar fashion, just the inverse, if price pulls back to that level and fails, that means the breakout longs are trapped and support has failed, and you look to sell a rally back into this area with the high defining your risk. And again, first trouble area, usually some sort of higher low level relative to the swing, but then blah, 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 FTA, watch the video. But those two are really basic kind of price patterns that we've seen a million times, but I think it makes sense to kind of show them as well, so you know what I'm talking about when I discuss these altcoins. And when I say with Link, for example, what that would look like should hopefully provide some extra context. If that was helpful, let me know. We can do more of that. We can maybe do like one teaching thing or something towards the end of every session. I don't really mind. Again, it's your time as much as it is mine. If you have suggestions, recommendations, preferences, let me know in the comments below. I think that's all I've got for now. We've covered a fair bit of this. If you want more analysis or more content before Donald's stream on Wednesday, the newsletter is free. Go subscribe to it. It's really good, much better than it was before. We'd love to have you on that mailing list. Thank you to Bybit for sponsoring Technical Roundup, especially as the markets get interesting. It's nice that we can provide this to you on a consistent and a scheduled basis. So thank you to them for making that possible. Their links are in the description below. And as I said, the content schedule is pretty busy. You've got me on Monday, you've got the newsletter on Tuesday, you've got the Duck on Wednesday, Thursday off, and then we've got Casual Friday on Friday, the weekend's off, and then we start all over again. If this sounds like your cup of tea, make sure you like the video. We're almost at 200 likes. We can break that. That'd be crazy. Appreciate your support. Subscribe to the channel. We're trying to make moves here. Newsletter out tomorrow. If you don't, make sure you're subscribed before. I'll do it now, but certainly before 8 UTC tomorrow to get the most recent issue. And that's all I've got for now. It's nice to talk to you as usual. Trade safe, and I will see you for the next stream on Friday. Thanks, guys. Take care. Bye-bye. Заебись.